Can the Bills finally assemble the right mix of edge defenders? We're exploring what happened in 2025 and projecting things forward today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Well, folks, welcome in. We're talking edge rushers on today's episode. Want to reflect on the 2025 season and project things moving forward, where the Bills have some things to figure out with the scheme change to what Jim Leonhard wants to do with this defense and contrasting that to players that were for another defense. And so we'll talk this through, figure out who should stay, who should go, and what the Bills ultimately need to add. So let's dive into it. We'll start with Greg Rousseau, a 2021 first-round pick, number 30 overall. He's still young. He's 25. He's going to turn 26 in April. And he's entering year one of his 4-year, $80 million contract extension. In 2025, he played in 16 games, was on the field for 67% of the defensive snaps, 46 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 55 pressures, and 7 sacks. His 55 pressures led the team. Joey Bosa was number 2 with 47, and then A.J. Epenesa third with 28. So let's talk about the 2025 season for Greg Rousseau, and I think he continues to be a quality starter for the Buffalo Bills. And he's somewhat of a polarizing player, and I don't totally understand why. I think there's a misconception about what he's paid and where that truly lands among the elite edge rushers in the NFL. He's the 16th highest paid defensive end in the NFL. And I absolutely believe he gives the Bills at least contributions worthy of the 16th highest paid defensive end in the NFL. In fact, looking at some of his metrics, among the 60 edge rushers in 2025 who are in the top 50% of snaps played, so that threshold was 319 snaps or more, he was 15th in pass rush productivity score, which is a rating that measures pressures created on a per snap basis with weight towards sacks. He was 16th in pass rush win rate. He's undeniably one of the top 5 run defending edge players in the entire NFL. I think he's a rock solid player. No, he's not Myles Garrett or Micah Parsons or Aiden Hutchinson or TJ Watt, but you know what? He's also paid half of what those guys make. He's a good football player. And so I think the best thing you can do if you're disappointed in Greg Rousseau is to get yourself calibrated to have the right expectation, right? Like expectation minus reality equals disappointment. And if you expect him to be Hutch or Parsons or Garrett, well, you got your expectations in the wrong place. I think that he's a quality starter for this football team. Are there times where I wish he was more dominant and more impactful? Of course. Of course I do. And I thought he really turned things on in a very positive way down the stretch. Had some injury stuff early in the season. He's a good football player. And as you project things to 2026, I'm really curious to see what the plan is under Jim Leonhard. Is he a player that they move around a little bit more? Do they want him to play as a rush outside linebacker? Do they want his hand in the dirt as a 5 tech? I think you have a lot of options with that. I'm pretty interested in seeing him play that 4-eye type role that you see guys like Osa Digizua, Tuli Tuipulotu, John Franklin Myers, that type of role. I think he can handle that quite well, and his power and physicality and length can really show up. Now, I'm sure he'll get some chances to play rush outside linebacker, and I I think situationally that's probably okay, but I think he's a little bit more of a linear athlete than he is someone with a lot of lateral quickness or bend or flexibility. So I'd want to get him in some tighter alignments and allow him to use his length and power to affect the quarterback. And I really get excited when I think about if the Bills can get the right mix around Greg Rousseau, because no, he's not a sack artist, but boy, I think he could be a heck of a cleanup guy. And the Bills haven't really had a ton of consistency around him that allows him to play more to that style. And I think that would unlock even more splash production from Greg Rousseau. But good football player, 16th highest paid defensive end in the NFL. And I think he at least gives the Bills contributions that would land him as the 16th highest paid defensive end in the NFL. His running mate this past year was Joey Bosa, a 2025 free agent signing. He's 30 years old. He turns 31 in July. His contract is expired. He played out his 1 year, $12.6 million contract, keeping in mind that $7.2 million of that 12.6 counts against this year's cap. And so that was one of the roster gymnastics type moves that Brandon Beane had to do to fit players in under last year's cap. And so regardless of Bosa's status on the actual Bills roster this year, he's counting $7.2 million against the cap. In 2025, he played in 15 games, and in those 15 games, 64% of snaps. In fact, his snap total this year was the most he's played in 4 seasons. Had 29 tackles, 9 for loss, 47 pressures, 5 sacks, and 5 forced fumbles. In fact, those 5 forced fumbles led the entire NFL. So like I said, he played the most snaps he's played in 4 years, which was always a big conversation point with Bosa and him coming to the Bills, was availability. How much could they get out of him? And not only did they get, I think the 3rd most snaps he's ever played in a season, but by his own admission, saying he felt great going into the playoffs. I think Bosa certainly had his moments, but I will say that after that Pittsburgh game, he had that huge strip sack on Aaron Rodgers. I think he kind of disappeared. And I think he chased sacks and wasn't disciplined against the run. They did a mic'd up, the Bills YouTube did a mic'd up of Joey Bosa. I can't remember which game it was. It was one of the games later in the year. And you could tell based on his own commentary, it was just kind of a frustration for him about not having more sack production. And he was, doubting, am I ever going to get a sack again? And when you start to search for big plays and don't just play and be disciplined and do your 111th and read and react appropriately, that's when you're out of position. And that's when you just don't make any plays. And I think one of the metrics that really aligns with what I'm trying to communicate here is that his missed tackle rate was 30%. 30%. That's a ridiculously high number. Way higher than any other season of his career. And that's because you're not playing under control. You're not reading and reacting. You're out of position and you're not able to finish. And so I think he absolutely had his moments, but I think we'll be left thinking most about how he didn't play his best when the Bills needed him most, which was the playoffs. And everybody said, bubble wrap him for the playoffs. Just get him to January. Well, they sort of kind of did that, and he was disappointing in January. So kind of a okay signing, but ultimately didn't quite do what you wanted him to do. You were thinking that, hey, you roll the dice on a player that's had injuries that can be capable of a high impact and try to, catch lightning in a bottle in a prove it year. And in some ways you got some good things, but I think ultimately it kind of missed the mark. So as far as the 2026 outlook, I don't think he's going to return. I would invest that idea, right? So the idea of a impact player off the edge, I'd invest differently. Jim Leonhard's defense is actually more in line with what Joey Bosa has played in for most of his career. But I try to get younger. I try to get more explosive in terms of athleticism and turn the page and wish Joey Bosa all the best moving forward. All right, we got a whole lot more to do. We'll talk AJ Epenesa, who's an expiring contract, and then all these players coming back, but off of injury, and Michael Hoit, Javon Solomon, and Landon Jackson. So we'll do that next, folks. Be sure to stick with me. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. The drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get fast intense, speed skating races decided by inches, hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. Even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. So the Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. All right, let's talk about AJ Epenesa, who has completed 6 seasons for the Buffalo Bills. A 2020 second-round pick, number 54 overall. He's 27. He'll turn 28 in September, and his contract is expired. He's completed his 2-year, $12 million contract extension. In 2025, he played in 16 games, 47% of the defensive snaps, collected 32 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 28 pressures, 2.5 sacks, had 4 pass breakups, and did have 2 interceptions. So I think it was in some ways a very typical AJ Epenesa season where there's flash moments. He'll disappear for stretches, usually late in the year, and just remind you that he's a sufficient third defensive end. And his sack totals were lower. He had been 6 or more sacks each of the last 3 years. He had 2.5 this past season. He did, of course, have the couple of interceptions that were fun plays. But I kind of feel like AJ Epenesa has done his thing in Buffalo. And as far as the 2026 outlook, I would understand letting him move on. I think this is the type of piece to transition away from. I think he'll probably command a contract that pays him around $6 to $7 to $8 million a year. That's somewhat comparable to the one that he just finished playing on in Buffalo. And I just don't know if that's the area that I would want to invest depth money in for my front, especially considering some of the new skill sets that you need. And for AJ Epenesa, I don't really want him playing as a rush outside linebacker. Maybe he can be a 5 tech. Maybe he can be that 4-eye role. But it's not super clean, and I'd let him kind of latch on somewhere that will allow him to play more to the skill set he's established in the NFL. So I think AJ Epenesa had a reasonably sound 6-year run with the Bills, and I'd let him walk, and we'll see what the Bills ultimately decide to do. All right, now the next 3 players are all guys that are coming off injuries: Hoit, Solomon, and Jackson. So let's talk Michael Hoit next, a 2025 free agent signing. He's 28 years old. He's going to turn 29 in October. He's entering year 2 of his 3-year, $21 million contract. He only played in 2 games in 2025. In those 2 games, he was on the field for 53% of snaps, collected 5 tackles, 1 for loss, 8 pressures, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble. Of course, he missed the first 6 games due to suspension, and then he didn't finish his second game. Popped his Achilles, right? Looked like he was on his way to becoming a thing. I mean, very quickly won over the fan base. I mean, you're talking about a guy that's a free agent signing that's suspended for 6 games to start his career. And he came back, and you just kind of felt that this was a player that was going to make a big impact for this team. And you couldn't even finish 2 games before he pops that Achilles. And I do wonder how much different this season looks with Hoit and Oliver. Those guys were healthy, and where the defense could have gone, and ultimately where the team could have gone. And so I think it's the combination of what he was in camp, what he was in preseason, what he showed in, the game and a half or whatever that he played in that got you pretty excited. He played with a hot motor. Looked like he was going to be a guy, And so now you consider 2026, and it's a really good scheme for him to settle into with Jim Leonhard. I think it's very clean, very clean. The problem is he's coming back from injury. When is he ready? How effective is he going to be? And what can you count on? it's a challenging situation. The answer to all of those questions are very much unknown. The idea of Michael Hoit is very strong. I don't know what Michael Hoit is going to be like entering his age 28 season coming off of an Achilles. Achilles injuries are tough. So hopefully he can come back strong and quickly remind us of the promise he showed. But I think it's hard to know fully what to expect, which makes it hard to really project and get this room right. But they're going to have the right idea. I'm hopeful that this can work out, and they can just pick up the pieces and run with it. I'm sure Michael Hoit will attack this rehab and do everything he can to get back and be the best player he can. But I think there's always a little bit of doubt that comes in with that, as we've seen throughout the years of players coming back off injuries with the Bills. Next player is Javon Solomon, a 2024 fifth-round pick, number 168 overall. He's 25 years old. He'll turn 26 in January. He's entering the third year of his 4-year, $4.3 million rookie deal. In 2025, he was active for all 17 games, played 20% of the defensive snaps, had 17 tackles, 1 for loss, 8 pressures, and 1 sack. He also played a ton on special teams, 4th on the team in special team snaps, played all 4 phases. So kick return, punt return. That was a big part of his role. And, he was active for all 17 games, didn't play much on defense, but whatever he gave this team on special teams, the Bills must have been really satisfied with it, because they were calling up Andre Jones from the practice squad and Michael Fox from the practice squad and Matthew Judon from the practice squad and playing them over Solomon on defense, but Solomon would still be active to play on special teams. And the Bills gave him a chance to be the Michael Hoit player. Like before Hoit returned and after he got injured, they gave him some chances to be that same player. He just wasn't nearly as effective. He doesn't hold up against the run. And, one thing that's always been acknowledged is that he wasn't a fit for Sean McDermott's defense. Brandon Beane said that repeatedly. We didn't really plan on drafting him, but we knew the college production and kind of got to the point in the draft where it felt like we wanted to just, throw a dart. And while Solomon doesn't really fit or didn't really fit the McDermott defense, it's a much better projection to what Jim Leonhard wants to do as a rush outside linebacker. So I think 2026 is a big opportunity for Solomon to have a chance to showcase himself in a defense that's more tailored to what he does. Now he's got to prove it. Even for the production he had in college, he still fell to the 5th round in a non-scheme fit, and the Bills drafted him. And there's plenty of teams that had defenses that would fit his skill set that said, yeah, we're good. Doesn't quite have the length, doesn't quite have the explosiveness, kind of light, not a very good run defender. So we'll see how it all comes together this year. It's a big opportunity. I have a hard time knowing what to expect. I'm not going to go into 2026 thinking, Javon Solomon can be on the field to, for 35 to 45% of snaps, and we're going to love what we get. But I think he has a chance to be part of the mix and compete and see where it lands. I think it's a more optimistic look, but he's got a lot to prove. All right, coming up next, let's talk about Landon Jackson and then kind of zoom out and bring this conversation to a close by identifying exactly what the Bills have to get done this offseason. So, folks, be sure to stick with me. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but just wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire someone, I'd go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored jobs boost your posts to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes a real difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs are more likely, or 90% more likely, to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. So spend more time interviewing candidates, who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves on Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, let's talk about Landon Jackson, a 2025 third-round pick, number 72 overall. He just turned 23 in January. And so he's entering year 2 of his 4-year, $6.6 million rookie deal. And it was not a very good rookie season for him. Only played in 3 games, only played 30 snaps across those 3 games, and he didn't register a single stat. So no tackles, no pressures, no sacks, no fumble recovery, nothing. He did not record a single thing. And I just overall was a very disappointing rookie season. Whether that was training camp, preseason, just never really popped, never really flashed. Then he's inactive for the first 5 games of the year. Then he gets a jersey and he's ineffective, and then he's injured. Torn MCL, torn PCL in week 10. And so another player that's kind of tough to project moving forward. I'm concerned about it. He never looked comfortable. I mean, ever. And now he's got to get healthy and figure out this scheme and where he fits in. I think he's kind of a linear athlete, struggles to turn, struggles to corner, and doesn't have a ton of flexibility throughout his frame. I don't know that that's going to work for a rush outside linebacker role. Can he be a 5-tech or a 4-eye? Maybe. He's got length. In theory, he's got power, but he's got to be able to play faster. So that's got to be the big task ahead is how do you salvage this third-round pick who's coming off of knee injuries, a guy that's had a history of knee injuries? How does he fit, and how do you get him to play fast? That's the job ahead here for Jim Leonhard and company because, this is the third-round pick that's entering his second season. There's some level of burden to kind of see this through. You can't just write the guy off. So how do you position him to have success? I'm not optimistic, right? I'm concerned about what I saw, and then, of course, injury and a new scheme that I think is more complicating to project him into. So this position group just needs a lot of work, right? What do they have? Well, they have Greg Rousseau and Javon Solomon, who has a ton to prove, and Michael Hoit and Landon Jackson coming off of injuries. I feel good about Hoyt's projection, but he turns 29 in October, and he's coming off of an Achilles. What do they need? Well, they need a lot. You need some type of if they're going to be this 3-4 type defense that kind of mirrors what we saw in Denver and, of course, the Rex Ryan defense, what he ran in Wisconsin. They don't quite have the players. Now, what I'll say about that and what I'll continue to remind the world is that the transition to the new defense and needing to get certain skill sets there's really not that much different than what the Bills had to figure out to begin with. They were always going to need another starting defensive end and a nose tackle and a starting linebacker and a starting safety and depth. Those things were always necessary. But now you're in a position where you got to kind of figure out some returning players, but then go find that true impact speed rush. Make sure that you feel good about your options at 5-tech. Guys got to get healthy and figure out roles. Now, moving forward, these conversations are going to look a little bit different because I think it'll be more like we'll talk edge rushers and then we'll talk defensive line. And I'll put the 5-techs and the 4-eyes and the nose tackles together, and then you'll have your true edge rush outside linebacker type players in a different bucket. So this will look and feel a little bit different moving forward when we talk positionally about the defensive line. But there's pieces that they got to figure out in terms of new additions. And they need an impact player. They need an impact player. And so when I think about this offseason, and for Brandon Beane, I think you got two huge boxes to check. One of them is an impact receiver. One of them is an impact edge rusher. And so however that looks, a big veteran addition and a high draft pick, I think one of those has to go to the defense or the edge rusher. One of them has to go to the receiver. And ideally, you nail them both. Because we've talked for years and years about the right mix at defensive end, and feels like they still kind of continue to fall short. There's been plenty of swings, Von Miller, Joey Bosa, that kind of going with like a shotgun approach of like a bunch of mid-level players in previous years. And you've never quite had the right group. Now, I do wonder, if like I said, if Michael Hoit and Ed Oliver are healthy, do you feel differently about how this pass rush turned out this year? I think maybe there's a good chance that it was the best we would have ever seen under Sean McDermott. And for 9 weeks, it probably was. And then the rest of the season happened and it fell apart. Let's hope we have a different story to tell after next season. But I'm really fascinated to see not only who they bring in, what skill sets are prioritized, but what is the true plan for Rousseau, Hoit, Solomon, and Jackson. All right. We'll talk defensive tackles tomorrow. Work our way linebackers, corners, safeties, and these conversations last week and this week are very foundational to all of the content that we're going to build moving forward as we identify each position group and what the Bills need to get done and the holes. And now we can transition starting next week into how to start filling those holes with veterans and draft picks and kind of talk through this offseason. It's always a fun part of the year. So thanks for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.